Guru Vaheguru 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 Vaheguru.
Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Thank you everyone for joining us today during Sikh Heritage Month. This year has been difficult by being apart from each other, but it's wonderful that we can all be together through our screens. We're happy to be joined by Jasminder Sekhon today from Posh and Political for our third and final Daughters of Punjab event this month. Jasminder is a specialist in gendered violence and human trafficking prevention through an intersectional feminist, sex-positive, and trauma-informed lens. She is a graduate from the University of Oxford's Masters of Science in Criminology and Criminal Justice and has an honors Bachelor's of Arts in Political Science and Criminology from the University of Toronto. Jasminder is the Human Trafficking Prevention Facilitator of Victim Services of Durham region and a professor of Sewell College. She has extensive experience leading and assisting research and policy analysis through work experience at Blue Jay Legal, the Ministry of Attorney General, and Community Legal Education Ontario, to name a few. Today, we will be discussing gender-based violence, and we will be taking questions at the end. So if you do have any questions through this talk, please type them in the Q&A box, or you can raise your hand and unmute at the end and pose your question verbally. So without further ado, please welcome Jasminder. Thank you for joining us today.
Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh, Harleen Kaur. It's such a pleasure. Thank you so much to you and to Sikh Heritage Month Ottawa, both for organizing this event and for having me here today. It's an absolute honor, and I'm so excited to give back to the community and be having this conversation with you all.
Yes, of course. So to start off, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, for sure. So just to start off, right before I sort of introduce myself, I do just want to say we are going to be talking about some really difficult topics today. Like we are going to be talking about, like sexual violence in the community, about domestic violence, and about some really hard topics about honor-based violence. So today's presentation can potentially be heavy. So ਜੇ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ overwhelming ਲੱਗੇ ਜਾਂ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਇਦਾਂ ਮਹਿਸੂਸ ਹੋ ਰਿਹਾ ਆ ਕਿ too much ਆ ਤੇ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਸਾਹ ਲੈਣ ਦੀ ਲੋੜ ਆ or you need to take a break ਜਾਂ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਕੋਈ question ਪੁੱਛਣਾ ਹੈ ਇਦਾਂ ਦੀ ਕੋਈ ਵੀ ਚੀਜ਼ ਆ ਤਾਂ ਪਲੀਜ਼ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਆਪਣਾ question chat box ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਪਾ ਸਕਦੇ ਆ take a break ਆਪਣਾ ਕੈਮਰਾ ਬੰਦ ਕਰ ਲਓ ਜੋ ਵੀ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਲਈ comfortable ਆ ਜੋ ਵੀ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਠੀਕ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਪਲੀਜ਼ ਕਰੋ and ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸਾਰੇ opinions ਜਿਹੜੇ ਮੈਂ ਅੱਜ ਆਪਣੇ share ਕਰਨ ਲੱਗੀ ਹਾਂ, it's my opinions, doesn't necessarily reflect the views of Sikh Heritage Month Ottawa. So please, it's two separate entities. And ਜਿਹੜਾ ਮੇਰਾ email I'll be providing that at the end as well. So ਜੇ ਕਿਸੇ ਕੋਲ ਕੋਈ ਵੀ question ਹੈਗਾ ਜਾਂ ਕੋਈ follow up resources ਚਾਹੀਦੇ ਆ, you can always message me and I'm more than happy to respond. So thank you for your question, Harleen Kaur. A little bit about me. So my name is Jasminder Sekhon. As Harleen Kaur mentioned, I am the human trafficking prevention facilitator at Victim Services of Durham Region. So I do a lot of work around gender-based violence and gender-based violence prevention. So the reason why I do this work and why I'm so inspired to do this work is because of my own lived experiences. I've had so much experiences with gender-based violence within our own community, outside of the community, sort of in both the elements in which I live. So my parents immigrated to Canada back in about 1992, and they, came here to build a better life for themselves. And so I'm a second generation immigrant here. So I was born in Canada and raised in Canada as well. I've been back to, India and Punjab several times. But a lot of my, perspectives and life is sort of, developed by being, a Sikh, a Punjabi, a Indian, living here in Canada. So it's definitely a very unique position. And not only do I experience the gender inequality that exists within the culture back home, back in India, but also the gender inequality that exists here within Canada as well. And so that oppression is twofold, right? I'm also female identifying, so I definitely, there's that factor. And so, in terms of today and what we're talking about today, I'm very excited to be joining you all. A lot of my work has also really focused on gender-based violence. And so gender-based violence being, violence that occurs because of your gender, right? So essentially, I focused on criminology and political science when I was doing my bachelor's degree at the University of Toronto. After that, I went to England to the University of Oxford, where I did my master's degree, and there I studied criminology, and I focused specifically on gender-based violence. So gender-based violence is basically violence that is perpetrated against a person because of their gender. And this is, happening to millions of people around the globe. Gender inequity is, very, very high, and gender-based violence is at an all-time high, when we're looking at the statistics in particular during the COVID-19 pandemic. So it's very important, I think, to be bringing this conversation forward and to be having these conversations. Specifically, when I studied in the UK, I focused my studies on honor-based violence. So honor-based violence being violence that's perpetrated because of honor, right? ਇੱਜ਼ਤ ਦੇ ਕਰਕੇ ਕਿਸੇ ਨੂੰ ਮਾਰਨਾ, ਕੁੱਟਣਾ, ਕਿਸੇ ਨੂੰ ਕੋਈ, like to actually kill somebody, ਕਿਸੇ ਨਾਲ, bad ਤਰੀਕੇ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਨੀ, right? Abusing them verbally, physically, emotionally, psychologically, sexually, all these different ways. And I really focused on that. And that also comes from my own experiences, again, living in the community and recognizing, there's so much stigma around so many different things that, could potentially lead to violence. And so that's the reason why I studied that. And it's one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about gender-based violence and gender-based violence prevention.
Thank you for sharing all of that, especially what inspired you and everything. So can you talk to us a little bit about what honor-based violence is and what inspired you to pursue this education specifically?
Yeah, for sure. So honor-based violence, like I mentioned, is violence that's perpetrated against somebody because they did something that goes against the norm. So ਕਿਸੇ ਨੇ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਬੇਇੱਜ਼ਤੀ ਕੀਤੀ, or they did something ਜਿਹਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ family ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਸ਼ਰਮ ਆਉਂਦੀ ਆ, and because of that, you're committing violence against the person. So that could be, literally killing a person. It could be physical violence. It could be social violence. It could be psychological. ਕਿਸੇ ਦੇ mind ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਇਹ ਚੀਜ਼ ਕਰਨੀ emotional, right? And so really the point of perpetrating this violence is to say, I don't condone this behavior because I am separate from this behavior, to try and create that separation, and also to try and keep people in check and try to keep them in line with only doing behaviors that are considered honorable, right? So the really important thing to remember about honor is when we're talking about honor, right? Honor, another word for honor is ijjat, right? And then the opposite would be shame, right? Sharm, right? So honor really gets at those ideas of like respect, reputation, dignity, esteem, virtue, right? So that constant thing in our culture where we're constantly thinking loki ki kahange, it's because we're trying to hold on to our honor, right? We're building social capital for ourselves, and we don't want to be seen in a bad light by other people. And then when we're looking at shame, shame is about sharm, right? So if you're concerned about honor, you're equally as concerned about avoiding shame or avoiding shameful behavior. And one of the really important things to recognize about honor-based violence is that it tends to be put on women, and it tends to be put on females. So this whole idea about, you need to maintain honor of the family, it's really about, women need to avoid shameful behavior. And what is the most shameful thing that our culture looks down on? It's sex, right? And I'm going to say that word openly because we are trying to destigmatize these conversations, because if we continue to stigmatize these conversations and we don't have these conversations, people are going to continue to experience this kind of violence. And it tends to be men who are upholding the family and social group's honor. And it becomes sort of like their job to ensure that their women are the ones who are avoiding shame. We also see women feeding into this as well, right? And that is because for them, if somebody in your family does something shameful, so as a woman, if your daughter does something shameful, or if your sister does something shameful, people have the perception that that shame is going to come back on me. And maybe that might mean that I can't get married, or people will look down on me, or people will look down on my family and they won't view me as respectable, right? And so really it disproportionately tends to fall on women and girls. And what I want to emphasize to you all today is that when it comes to honor and honor-based violence, there is no honor in hurting somebody else. There is no honor in that at all. When it comes to our religion, our Gurujis, they fought for social justice. They fought for gender equality, right? They fought for equality between, different castes. And we cannot go back in time. A lot of the ideas and perceptions around, violence and sex and honor-based violence is actually based on Victorian notions of honor. So it actually goes back to India's colonial rule and, ideas that white people had, that British people had around honor and what is honorable. And so a lot of people in South Asia to this day define honor based on those Victorian era sort of ideologies. And the reality is that, prior to the colonization, we had different ideas about honor and shame. And those things have changed. And I think what we really need to recognize is that we cannot think that, honor and shame comes from somebody's private part. Right? If we are attaching honor and what is honorable to somebody's private areas, first of all, does somebody explain that logic to me? It just doesn't make sense, right? And then the other thing is that, we see people experiencing violence because of this. We see violence being perpetuated from generation to generation because of this. We see people unable to leave marriages. We see people unable to leave, or like people being forced to marry their rapists, people that are, historically were forced to burn themselves at the funeral pyre of their husbands, which we saw our Gurujis going against and saying that this is not okay, this is not acceptable. And to this day, those ideas, the mindset that is behind those actions and behaviors continues to persist and is pervasive in our society and in our culture. And we need to break that down, and we need to stop putting our ideas of honor, what is honorable, and that kind of thing, just based on whether or not somebody has had sex, or whether or not somebody has only had one partner or something of that nature, because we see that it is absolutely very, very harmful. And we see how oftentimes this keeps people stuck in situations that are unsafe for them. And it also leads to people being unable to actually get supports for themselves. And so I hope that that sort of, ties things a little bit together. And I think it's also sort of going to lead us into our next question as well, which I'll pass the mic back over to you, Harleen.
Yeah, for sure. You talk about some really, really important subjects, and it's just the irony that, kind of flabbergasts me, the irony that like people kill because someone's not being honorable in their eyes, but like what's honorable about what they've just done. So now can you touch on some domestic violence and how it affects the South Asian community specifically?
Yeah, for sure. So we see domestic violence happening all of the time in our community. We see it happening all the time. We see people being pushed into marriages. We see people in marriages in which there is domestic violence present. We see people in marriages where they are being hurt. And yet we are more open and willing to stigmatize, the person that wants to leave than we are willing to stigmatize the abuser and the person who's perpetrating that violence. And we cannot do this. This is not acceptable and it's not sustainable. When it comes to relationships, right? We have so many relationships in our lives, right? We have relationships, as family members. We have relationships with our parents. We have relationships with our grandparents. We have relationships, with our intimate partners, right? So with husbands, wives, whatever, whoever your partner is, right? So we see all of these, real relationships happening. And I want to emphasize that when we talk about abusive relationships and domestic violence, when I say domestic violence, I'm not just talking about intimate partner violence. So that's violence that happens between, two people that are in a intimate relationship with one another, but it also refers to violence that is occurring within the home. And I think it's really, really, really important to emphasize that in our communities, we see so much abuse. We see parents abusing children and it's completely normalized. Like how many times do we joke around like, that, or we see jokes about, my parent hitting me with chappal or velna or, something or the other, right? So we're always seeing these jokes, and the reality is like abuse is not a joke. Right. And parents can also be very capable of perpetrating this violence as well. And oftentimes when violence is perpetrated as well, and kids are seeing that within their home, and they're seeing that, perhaps parents are staying in that situation and they're not leaving, that really ends up normalizing that abuse and oftentimes ends up putting people in situations in which they may not actually feel that they can exit, and that becomes intergenerational. So it doesn't just happen, to one generation. That younger generation, ਜਿਹੜੇ ਬੱਚੇ ਉਸ ਘਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੱਡੇ ਹੋ ਰਹੇ ਆ, ਉਹ ਜਦੋਂ ਇਹ behavior ਦੇਖਦੇ ਆ ਆਪਣੇ ਘਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ, they normalize that behavior. They think ਵੀ ਇਹ ਚੀਜ਼ normal ਆ, and it's not, right? The other thing we see is if parents are abusing children as well, those people will also normalize that abuse and say, okay, you know what? Abuse from my parents is normal because my parents say, you know what? I love you. That's why I'm doing this to you, to teach you a lesson or something like that. And when we see that happening, that also normalizes abuse and makes it more difficult for people to leave these relationships in the future. The studies have been done. The evidence is there that people are less likely to leave relationships if they believe, or if they have been abused in the past within their home, pardon me. So things really, relationships really exist, on a spectrum. So it can go from anywhere to healthy, unhealthy, and abusive. And I've sort of just put everything on the screen here so we're really able to see what that breakdown is of healthy to unhealthy to abusive. So, a healthy relationship means you and the other person. And I want to remember other person, this could be your family member, your sibling, your, husband, your wife, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, right? The healthy relationship is you and your partner are communicating. So you're talking openly and honestly. You listen to each other, you're respecting each other's opinions. you're respectful. So you respect each other as you are, and you respect each other's boundaries. You trust each other, right? You don't feel the need to prove each other's trustworthiness. You're honest with one another, but you can still keep some things private. You're equal, right? So you make decisions together, you hold each other to the same standards, and you're able to enjoy spending personal time and time apart and having that space for yourself. Relationships, I think it's important to remember, is relationships that are healthy can always become unhealthy. So say I have a partner and we maybe are having a super busy week, so maybe we're not communicating as much, or but if that element becomes okay, then we recognize that, we talk about it, and then we start communicating again, that shifts the relationship back to healthy, right? But things like if somebody's communicating with you in a way that's hurtful, threatening, insulting, or demeaning, that's abuse, right? And there's a lot of different red flags and warning signs of abuse. So these are some of the warning signs of an abusive relationship: constantly putting someone down, kisi nu thalle lona, extremely jealous or insecure, kisi de naal jalan karna, an explosive temper, gussa karna, and jado gussa karna, like lots of anger, right? Bahut jyada gussa. Isolating someone from their family or friends, dictating who they can and can't see. So ਕਿਸੇ ਨੂੰ ਆਪਦੀ friends ਜਾਂ family ਤੋਂ ਦੂਰ ਰੱਖਣਾ, ਜਿਵੇਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਕਹਿਣਾ ਕਿ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਫੋਨ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਗੱਲ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਜਾਂ ਇਦਾਂ ਦੀਆਂ ਚੀਜ਼ਾਂ. Mood swings, maybe ਉਹ ਇੱਕ second nice ਹੁੰਦੇ ਆ ਤੇ ਫਿਰ ਦੂਜੇ ਮਿੰਟ ਉਹ ਬਹੁਤ ਗੁੱਸੇ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਆ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਆ, and ਉਹ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਆ ਕਿ ਤੂੰ ਕੁਛ ਕੀਤਾ ਜਿਹਦੇ ਕਰਕੇ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਗੁੱਸਾ ਆ ਗਿਆ, right? And they're blaming it on you. Checking someone's cell phone, social media, or their email without their permission. So ਕਿਸੇ ਦਾ ਫੋਨ ਚੈੱਕ ਕਰਨਾ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਸੋਸ਼ਲ ਮੀਡੀਆ ਚੈੱਕ ਕਰਨਾ, ਈਮੇਲ ਚੈੱਕ ਕਰਨਾ ਬਿਨਾਂ ਉਸ ਪਰਸਨ ਦੀ ਪਰਮਿਸ਼ਨ ਤੋਂ, that's a warning sign of an abusive relationship. Physically hurting someone in any way, ਕਿਸੇ ਨੂੰ ਕੁੱਟਣਾ, ਮਾਰਨਾ, ਕਿਸੇ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਹੱਥ ਚੱਕਣਾ, these are all examples of physical abuse. Possessiveness, right? So telling someone that tu meri cheez hai, right? Or you belong to me, and telling someone ਵੀ ਉਹ ਕਿਹੜੀ ਚੀਜ਼ ਪਾ ਸਕਦੇ ਆ ਤੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਪਾ ਸਕਦੇ, ਕਿਹੜਾ ਕੱਪੜਾ ਲੀੜਾ ਪਾ ਸਕਦੇ ਆ ਤੇ ਕਿਹੜਾ ਕੱਪੜਾ ਲੀੜਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਪਾ ਸਕਦੇ, right? These are all warning signs of an abusive relationship. And I've also have some of the warning signs of an abusive relationship in Punjabi here. It's important and very, very important to recognize that abuse is happening in many different, sort of domestic situations. One of the things we really stigmatize in our community is having a boyfriend or a girlfriend. And for a lot of young people, this is normalized. And what I have personally seen, people who are in relationships that are abusive, getting beaten up, coming back home to their mom and dad, and their mom and dad say, changa hoya, tere naal aida hona chahiye siga, because you did this thing. And that goes back, and that ties back to honor-based violence, right? Because we're so concerned, we low-key ki kahange, right? Or we're so concerned about, these types of things. What sometimes we end up missing out on is actually being able to provide safe and effective supports to people, especially young people that have been put in these situations, because parents are just so scared or they're just so nervous. And once again, I want to emphasize to you all that somebody's value, somebody's honor, whether or not somebody's a respectable person, does not come from their sexual history. Those two things are just not related. And that's my opinion. It's fine if you disagree. But I can say honestly that is one of the biggest issues in our community when it comes to getting people help and getting people support. We see people in abusive relationships that cannot leave. They do not feel comfortable leaving. ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਘਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹਰ ਰੋਜ਼ maybe ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ husband ਸ਼ਰਾਬ ਪੀ ਕੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਕੁੱਟਦਾ ਆ. We see people, ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੇ ਮਾਪੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਕੁੱਟਦੇ ਆ, and we're not comfortable with letting people move out of their parents' house. We're not comfortable supporting women if they want to get a divorce or they want to leave their partner. For myself personally, a couple of years ago, mera roka hoya siga. After that, I found out we jide munde de naal mera roka hoya siga. He was doing drugs, he's cheating on me, and I left him. And the pushback that I got from the community, where they would have been happier for me to spend the rest of my life with somebody that is not right for me, with somebody that does not make me happy, somebody that does not make me feel safe, somebody that does not make me feel appreciated and loved and cared for. the fact that people felt more comfortable seeing me spend the rest of my life with that person rather than dating somebody and breaking up just summarizes the extent of this issue. And so we need to destigmatize leaving relationships, not just relationships that are abusive, but also relationships that are unhealthy and that are not right for you, in which you do not feel loved, in which you do not feel cherished, in which you do not feel cared for. And once again, it goes back to honor as to why people don't want to leave, because people feel after somebody leaves that relationship, "Eda ki hun banuga?" She's done, she's damaged goods or something like that. And we are stigmatizing women, right? Based on, once again, their sexual history. All of it ties back to purity culture, about the value of women being tied to sex. And we need to talk about this, and we need to destigmatize this in order to be able to ensure that people are able to put themselves in safe positions and are able to be okay in these situations. And what I really want to share with you guys is this is a relationship bill of rights. Har person kol har relationship de vich hak hege ne. And ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਹੱਕ ਆ, these things can help us set boundaries that need to be respected by both people in a healthy relationship. So ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਕੋਲ ਹੱਕ ਆ ਆਪਣੀ privacy ਦਾ. So, you have the right to, have privacy, right? You have the right to feel safe. You have the right to feel respected. You have the right to date, to decide who you want to date or not to date. And you also have the right to decide who you want to marry or not to marry. We also see people being pushed into arranged marriages that they do not want to do. A forced marriage and arranged marriage are two completely different things. An arranged marriage is when somebody sets up a wedding for you and they're the ones that are encouraging it. Maybe it's a parent or a parent's friend or an auntie or an uncle or something like that. That's an arranged marriage, right? A forced marriage is when one or more of the people who are, going to get married, so one or both of the people don't agree to that marriage. And yet people are being pushed into getting married because what if this person gets too old? Right? The stigma that comes with that. Once again, it ties back to Loki ki kahange, right? And we need to start moving away from that, right? You also have the right to say no at any time to anything, even if you have said yes before. You have the right to say no to sex, even if you are married to that person. If somebody has sex with you and you are married to that person and you don't want to have sex, that is still sexual abuse. That is still rape. And I really want to emphasize that you have the right to choose that, regardless of what your relationship is with that person. You have the right to hang out with, whoever you want to and do things that you enjoy doing. If you enjoy going to the Gurdwara, right? If you enjoy doing Kirtan, if you, enjoy, riding a bike, or you enjoy, seeing your friends every once in a while, or going to the mall, or going to the mall with your sister, right? These are all things that, you have the right to do, right? You have the right to hang out with your family and friends without your partner getting jealous or controlling. You also have the right to end a relationship that's not right or healthy for you. And you also have the right to live free from violence and abuse. ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਕੋਲ ਹੱਕ ਹੈਗਾ ਆ ਵੀ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਰਿਸ਼ਤਾ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਲਈ ਨਹੀਂ ਸਹੀ ਹੈਗਾ, ਉਸ ਚੀਜ਼ ਨੂੰ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਖਤਮ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਆ। ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਕੋਲ ਇਸ ਚੀਜ਼ ਦਾ ਹੱਕ ਹੈਗਾ ਆ, ਐਂਡ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਕੋਲ ਇਸ ਚੀਜ਼ ਦਾ ਵੀ ਹੱਕ ਹੈਗਾ ਆ ਵੀ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਬਿਨਾਂ violence ਤੋਂ, ਬਿਨਾਂ abuse ਤੋਂ ਜੀਣਾ. You have the right to live without these things in your life. And, I want to include this quote from the Shri Guru Granth Sahib Ji, because, if we view, two people who are partners, right, or two people who are husband and wife as one light in two bodies, how do you even feel that you have the right to injure that other person? How do you even feel that you have the right to hurt that other individual, right? Je har person de vich rab hega ya, je har person de vich rab vasda ya. How can you hurt other people, right? How can you hurt your children? How can you hurt your wife? How can you hurt your husband, right? How can you sit there and how can you judge other people and the circumstances that they are going through when har person de vich rab vasda ya? And we need to remember this. None of us have the right to hurt anybody else, no matter what the situation is. And I know we talked a little bit about, healthy relationships. I think it's very, very, very important that we need to reflect on, what does a healthy relationship look like to me, right? एक वधिया relationship मेरे लिए किद्दां लगदी आ, right? And it's also important to talk to your partner about what a healthy relationship looks like to you. It's also important to talk to your parents about what a healthy relationship looks like to you. You know, over the years, me and my parents, we've developed a lot. We've really started having conversations around, when you say this to me, I don't feel good, or I don't feel comfortable, or when this thing happened and you didn't support me, that made me feel really bad. And having those open and honest conversations with them in order to be able to build a better and more healthier relationship. And so when we also reflect on these things, it's easier to leave or break off a relationship that's not right or not healthy for you as well. So I'm going to pass it back over to you, Harleen.
Yeah,
And
for
before
sure.
I do, I'm so sorry about that, Harleen. Before
No,
I do,
no, it's fine.
I also just want to mention, ਜੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇਦਾਂ ਦੀ ਰਿਲੇਸ਼ਨਸ਼ਿਪ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ, I do have some resources for you ਵੀ ਜੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਉਸ ਚੀਜ਼ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਨਿਕਲਣਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਆ ਤੇ ਕਿੱਦਾਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਆਪਣੀ ਸੇਫਟੀ ਦਾ ਦੇਖਭਾਲ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਆ while you're doing that. So, if you're experiencing a situation like this and you want to leave that situation, I have resources for you that I'm happy to share. An email will be going out as a follow-up, and those resources will be included in that email. If the host can also just put that link in the chat, because I did send it to them earlier. It's a link about safety planning. And there's also a link in Punjabi about domestic violence and about healthy relationships as well. So safety planning includes things like, making sure that maybe you have an extra phone that nobody has access to, right? Maybe it is that, you have you have copy of your documents, maybe at your sister's house. You're saving some money, at the side to make sure if you have to leave, you're able to leave, right? You're setting up your life so that, if you have to exit, you have the education or you have the financial means to do so. And what I want to emphasize to every single person in the community is we should never push somebody back into a relationship that they left because they were unsafe. ਜੇ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਬੱਚੀ ਹੈ, ਜੇ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਕੁੜੀ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਘਰ ਨੂੰ ਵਾਪਸ ਆਉਂਦੀ ਆ, ਨਾਨਕੀ ਆਉਂਦੀ ਆ, because she feels ਵੀ ਮੈਂ ਆਪਣੇ ਘਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ safe ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗੀ, don't push her, don't force her to go back. It doesn't matter ਲੋਕੀ ਕੀ ਕਹਿਣਗੇ if you are dead. It does not matter. What we have seen in our culture, in our society, especially now with COVID, is people are being murdered at higher rates by their husbands, by their boyfriends, by their partners, in these situations. And we need to make sure that we never, ever, ever push anybody back into a relationship that is not safe for them. That is the worst thing that you could do for this person. Your job is to make sure that that person feels loved, to make sure that they feel supported. And if they have taken the time, if they have taken the energy, they have thought about this thing 1,000 times, I promise you, before they have made that decision. And I also promise you that you have no right to comment on that person's situation, because if they felt that they needed to leave, whatever they're telling you that they went through, I am telling you, I work in this field, whatever it is that they're telling you, they have had it 100 times worse. ਜਿਹੜੀ ਗੱਲ ਉਹ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਦੱਸਦੇ ਆ, ਉਦੋਂ I would say 100 ਗੁਣਾ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਉਹ ਚੀਜ਼ ਉਦੋਂ ਵੀ ਮਾੜੀ ਆ. So never, ever, ever force somebody back into a relationship that's not healthy for them. Back over to you, Harleen.
Yeah, okay. You spoke very strongly about that, and I really appreciate that as well. And you're speaking from personal experience, which makes it all the more strong and influential. And so we just wanted to let you know that I appreciate that you're speaking about this sort of stuff. And also I should apologize before we continue on. My camera is not turning on, but that's okay. Technical issues happen. So without further ado, can you talk about how sexual assault impacts the South Asian community?
Yeah, for sure. And of course, it's Zoom. There's always going to be some kind of technical issue. That's just the nature of living in this digital world, but I'm glad that we're still able to connect and have these conversations, even if they're online. So I really want to talk about sexual violence because it's not something that we talk about. And because we don't talk about it, people oftentimes are not able to recognize when they have been sexually assaulted or have experienced sexual assault. So sexual assault is forced or coerced sexual activity, including touching, when consent was not obtained, somebody's not capable of giving consent, there's an absence of consent, somebody's actions or words express a lack of consent, there's some kind of threat involved, there's a position of trust or authority involved, or somebody's not at the legal age of consent. So I keep saying consent, but what is consent, right? Consent is ਕਿਸੇ ਨੂੰ ਪੂਰੀ ਆਪਣੀ ਹੋਸ਼ ਜੋਸ਼ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਹਿਣਾ ਹਾਂ, right? ਕੋਈ ਚੀਜ਼ ਨੂੰ yes ਕਰਨਾ, right? And consent ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ mainly 4 elements ਹੁੰਦੇ ਆ. Consent ਸਾਫ਼ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਆ, you know, having open and honest conversations about sex and ਕਿਹੜੀ ਚੀਜ਼ ਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ comfortable ਆ, ਕਿਹੜੀ ਚੀਜ਼ ਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਨਹੀਂ comfortable. Consent is coherent. So ਜੇ ਕੋਈ ਵੀ person, you know, drunk ਜਾਂ high ਜਾਂ ਕੋਈ ਵੀ vulnerable position ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਾਂ ਸੁੱਤਾ ਆ, ਉਸ person ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਨਹੀਂ sex ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ. Consent is also willing. So ਕਦੀ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਿਸੇ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ pressure ਪਾ ਕੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਤੋਂ consent ਨਹੀਂ ਲੈ ਸਕਦੇ. ਅਸਲੀ ਦੁਨੀਆ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸੋ ਜੇ ਕੋਈ ਯੂ نو ਮੈਂ ਇੱਥੇ ਬੈਠੀ ਹਾਂ, ਜੇ ਕੋਈ ਮੇਰੇ ਯੂ نو ਮੱਥੇ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਗਨ ਲਾ ਕੇ ਕਵੇ ਕਿ ਮੇਰੇ ਨਾਲ ਤੂੰ ਸੈਕਸ ਕਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਤਾਂ ਮੈਂ ਤੇਰੇ ਗੋਲੀ ਮਾਰ ਦੇਣੀ ਆ, right? And I say yes, right? Is that consensual? No, right? ਮੈਂ ਆਪਣਾ ਅਸਲੀ consent ਨਹੀਂ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਮੈਂ ਉਸ ਚੀਜ਼ ਨੂੰ pressure ਦੇ ਥੱਲੇ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਆ. So that's not willing consent, right? ਅਸਲੀ ਦੁਨੀਆ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ you are more likely to be abused by somebody that you know, ਜਿਹੜੇ person ਨੂੰ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਜਾਣਦੇ ਆ. Oftentimes in relationships, even in relationships such as marriages. So when I say consent should never be given under pressure, usually asli duniya de vich it doesn't look like we kisi ne tade mathe de utte goli rakhi a. It looks like this. Tusi hale bachcha kyon nahi kita? Bachcha tusi kadon karunge? You know, tu meri wife, je tu meri wife ya ta tenu eh cheez mere naal karni chahidi a. ਇਹ ਮੇਰਾ ਹੱਕ ਬਣਦਾ ਆ, ਰਾਈਟ? ਮੇਰਾ ਹੱਕ ਆ ਤੇਰੀ ਬਾਡੀ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ, ਜਾਂ ਜੇ ਤੂੰ ਮੇਰੇ ਨਾਲ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰੂੰਗੀ ਤਾਂ ਮੈਂ ਹੋਰ ਕਿਸੇ ਨੂੰ ਲੱਭ ਲੂੰਗਾ ਜਿਹਨੇ ਇਹ ਚੀਜ਼ ਮੇਰੇ ਨਾਲ ਕਰਨੀ, ਰਾਈਟ? Those are different ways of pressuring somebody that, you know, you're making somebody say yes where they would have otherwise said no. ਜਿੱਥੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਿਸੇ ਤੋਂ ਹਾਂ ਕਹਾਉਂਦੇ ਆ, ਜਿੱਥੇ ਉਹ ਬੰਦਾ ਹੋਰ ਕੋਈ ਵੀ ਸਿਚੁਏਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਨਾ ਕਹੂਗਾ, ਉਹ ਚੀਜ਼ willing ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗੀ, ਉਹ ਚੀਜ਼ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਪੂਰੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਹੋਸ਼ ਜੋਸ਼ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਨਹੀਂ ਹਾਂ ਕਿਹਾ. So we need to remember ਵੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ consent ਆ ਇਹ willing ਆ. And ਸਭ ਤੋਂ ਵੱਡੀ problem ਜਿਹੜੀ ਮੈਂ ਦੇਖਦੀ ਆ is not ਵੀ ਕੋਈ ਰੋਡ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਤੁਰਦਾ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਆ ਤੇ you know ਵੀ ਕਿਸੇ ਨੇ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਰੇਪ ਕਰ ਦਿੱਤਾ. Usually it is happening in families, in you know husband wife relationships, in boyfriend girlfriend relationships. That is what I'm seeing. ਜਦੋਂ ਮੈਂ ਬੱਚਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਦੀ ਆ, ਜਦੋਂ ਮੈਂ ਬੁੜੀਆਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਦੀ ਆ, I'm seeing this happening all the time. So consent should never, ever, ever be given under pressure. And ਇਹ ਸਭ ਤੋਂ ਵੱਡੀ ਚੀਜ਼ ਆ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਮੈਂ ਦੇਖਦੀ ਆ when we're talking about consent. And consent should also be ongoing. ਜੇ ਮੈਂ ਕੋਈ ਚੀਜ਼ ਨੂੰ ਇੱਕ ਦਿਨ ਹਾਂ ਕਹਿ ਦਿੱਤੀ, doesn't mean ਵੀ ਦੂਏ ਦਿਨ ਵੀ ਮੈਂ ਹਾਂ ਕਹੂੰਗੀ. ਜੇ ਕਿਸੇ ਨੇ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਕਿਹਾ ਜਸਮਿੰਦਰ ਮੈਂ ਤੇਰੇ ਨਾਲ ਅੱਜ ਚਾਹ ਪੀਣੀ ਆ, ਤੇ ਮੈਂ ਕਿਹਾ ਓਕੇ ਚਲੋ ਅੱਜ ਚਾਹ ਪੀਨੇ ਆ, ਹਨਾ, ਬਹਿਨੇ ਆ ਬਾਹਰ ਚਾਹ ਪੀਂਦੇ ਆ, ਰਾਈਟ? ਇਹਦਾ ਇਹ ਨਹੀਂ ਮਤਲਬ ਕਿ ਮੈਂ ਕੱਲ ਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਵਰਾਂਡੇ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਬਹਿ ਕੇ ਚਾਹ ਪੀਊਂਗੀ, ਰਾਈਟ? ਸੋ ਜੇ ਮੈਂ ਇੱਕ ਦਿਨ ਕੋਈ ਚੀਜ਼ ਨੂੰ ਹਾਂ ਕਰ ਦਿੱਤੀ, it doesn't mean ਵੀ ਦੂਏ ਦਿਨ ਮੈਂ ਹਾਂ ਕਰ ਦੂੰਗੀ, ਰਾਈਟ? It also means ਵੀ ਜੇ ਮੈਂ ਪਹਿਲੋਂ ਹਾਂ ਕੀਤੀ ਤੇ ਮੈਂ ਕਹਿੰਦੀ ਆ ਵੀ ਹਾਂ ਚਲੋ ਚਾਹ ਬਣਾ ਦੋ, ਹਨਾ, ਫਿਰ ਮੇਰਾ ਮਨ ਬਦਲ ਗਿਆ, right? Doesn't mean ਵੀ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਉੱਥੇ ਬਹਿ ਕੇ ਮੇਰਾ ਮੂੰਹ ਫੜ ਕੇ ਚਾਹ ਮੇਰੇ ਗਲੇ ਦੇ ਥੱਲੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਮੇਰੇ ਮੂੰਹ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਪਾਉਂਗੇ, right? So you know ਜੇ ਮੈਂ ਆਪਣਾ ਮਾਈਂਡ ਬਦਲ ਲਿਆ, there's nothing wrong with that either. And ਜੇ ਮੈਂ 2-3 ਘੁੱਟ ਚਾਹ ਦੇ ਲੈ ਵੀ ਲਏ ਤੇ ਫਿਰ ਮੇਰਾ ਮਨ ਕੀਤਾ ਓਕੇ ਚਲੋ ਮੈਂ ਚਾਹ ਨੂੰ ਨਹੀਂ ਖਤਮ ਕਰਨਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੀ, I can always change my mind, right? So I hope that this is, you know, very helpful for us in terms of understanding ਵੀ consent ਕੀ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਆ ਤੇ ਅਸੀਂ consent ਕਿੱਦਾਂ ਦੇ ਸਕਦੇ ਆ ਤੇ ਕਿੱਦਾਂ consent ਲੈ ਸਕਦੇ ਆ. ਜਿੰਨਾ ਤੱਕ ਅਸੀਂ ਸੈਕਸ ਨੂੰ stigmatize ਕਰਦੇ ਆ ਤੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਆ ਵੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਇਸ ਚੀਜ਼ ਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਗੱਲ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ, people are going to continue to be raped and people are going to continue to be sexually assaulted. That is the reality. Another huge thing that we see is child sexual abuse. So child sexual abuse is ਕੋਈ ਵੀ situation ਜਿਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੋਈ ਬੱਚੇ ਨੂੰ ਇਨਵੋਲਵਮੈਂਟ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਆ ਜਿਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਕੋਈ ਸੈਕਸ਼ੂਅਲ ਐਕਟੀਵਿਟੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਤੋਂ ਕਰਾਈ ਜਾਂਦੀ ਆ ਜਾਂ ਕੀਤੀ ਜਾਂਦੀ ਆ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ so this could be in person ਜਾਂ online ਵੀ ਹੋ ਸਕਦਾ ਆ and ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਿਆਦੀਆਂ situations ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ mainly ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਕੀ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਹੈ ਵੀ ਉੱਥੇ ਕੋਈ relationship ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ trusting relationship ਫਿਰ ਉਹ person ਉਸ ਚੀਜ਼ ਦੀ advantage ਲੈਂਦਾ ਆ ਕਿ ਵੀ ਹੁਣ ਮੈਂ ਇਸ person ਦੀ ਕਿੱਦਾਂ advantage ਲਵਾਂ ਜਾਂ ਕਿੱਦਾਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਕਵਾਂ ਵੀ or ਜਾਂ ਕਿੱਦਾਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਤੋਂ ਕੋਈ ਚੀਜ਼ ਕਰਾਵਾਂ right and usually they'll trick that person into thinking that it's their fault. I want to share a story with you guys, right? A lot of us don't feel comfortable talking to our kids about sex, right? Sex, ਅਸੀਂ ਸੁਣਦੇ ਹੀ ਲੱਗ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਤੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਡਰ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਹਨਾ ਅਸੀਂ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਵੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਇਸ ਚੀਜ਼ ਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਨੀ, right? ਜਦੋਂ ਮੈਂ ਛੋਟੀ ਸੀ I was about 7 or 8 years old, right? ਕਿਸੇ ਨੇ so ਮੇਰੀ ਭੈਣ ਨੇ actually playground ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਸੁਣਿਆ the word sex, so somebody taught her what the word sex is, right? So then we were watching a couple days later ਅਸੀਂ ਇੱਕ movie ਦੇਖ ਰਹੇ ਸੀਗੇ ਚੋਰੀ ਚੋਰੀ ਚੁਪਕੇ ਚੁਪਕੇ I don't know if anybody remembers that movie but ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇੱਕ scene ਸੀਗੀ ਜਿਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਿਸੇ ਨੇ ਟੋਪੀ ਪਾਈ ਸੀ ਜਿਹਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਲਿਖਿਆ ਸੀਗਾ sexy, right? So she looked at that and she laughed and she said, I know what that means, right? Somebody told me at school. And I said, I want to know what that means, right? And she's like, I'm not going to tell you, you're too little, right? Tu jadi shoti hai, main nahi tenu dasna, right? So anyways, मैं रोई पिट्टी finally ਉਹਨੇ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਦੱਸ ਦਿੱਤਾ, right? What sex means. Just a couple days later, मैं एक family function ਤੇ ਸੀਗੀ and I had an older cousin ask me when everybody else left the room. So everybody else left to eat. I, as a kid, like refused to eat in the evening. ਸ਼ਾਮ ਨੂੰ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀ ਪਸੰਦ ਵੀ ਮੈਂ ਕੁਝ ਖਾਵਾਂ, right? So ਸਾਰੇ ਚਲੇ ਗਏ ਸੀਗੇ ਇਸ ਪਾਰਟੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਮੋਸੇ ਖਾਣ, right? ਚਾਹ ਪੀਣ, right? ਸਾਰੇ ਬੱਚੇ ਚਲੇ ਗਏ ਸੀਗੇ and I got left in this room with this one cousin. And he said to me, he said, do you know what sex is? ਤੈਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਹੈ ਵੀ sex ਕੀ ਆ? And because ਮੈਨੂੰ ਉਹ ਚੀਜ਼ ਪਤਾ ਸੀਗੀ ਮੈਂ ਕਿਹਾ ਹਾਂ and I said ਸਮੋਸੇ ਠੰਡੇ ਹੋ ਰਹੇ ਆ ਤੇ ਮੈਂ ਭੱਜ ਕੇ ਉੱਥੋਂ ਚਲੇ ਗਈ ਸੀ, right? But ਜੇ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਨਾ ਪਤਾ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਜੇ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਉਸ ਲਫ਼ਜ਼ ਦਾ ਮਤਲਬ ਨਾ ਪਤਾ ਹੁੰਦਾ and I said no, I don't know what that is, what could that person have done to me and said I'll show you what it is? ਜੇ ਉਹ person ਮੇਰੇ ਨਾਲ ਕੁਝ ਕਰਦਾ I may not have even known ਵੀ ਇਹ ਚੀਜ਼ ਗਲਤ ਆ. We have to teach kids sex ਕੀ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਆ ਤੁਹਾਡੀਆਂ boundaries ਕੀ ਆ ਇਹ and from a young age, ਜਿਹੜੇ time ਤੋਂ ਬੋਲ ਸਕਦੇ ਆ we have to teach kids ਵੀ ਕਿਹੜੀ ਚੀਜ਼ ਦਾ ਕੀ ਨਾਮ ਆ because if we make up these fake words for kids and stuff too ਜੇ ਕਿਸੇ ਨਾਲ ਕੁਝ ਹੋ ਵੀ ਜਾਵੇ and you have to make a police report saying that somebody made me touch their bird or their cat or whatever is different than saying that somebody touched my penis or my vagina, right? Because you have to get the translation and all of these things. And so we need to teach kids about the real language and we need to teach kids about what sex is. That is just the reality. If you want to keep your kids safe, the safest thing that you can do is teach them about sex because they are more likely to be abused by somebody that they know. Most offenders that do this to kids are not strangers. They know this person. This is a family member. This tends to be a friend. This tends to be somebody that you know, or a husband or a boyfriend or a girlfriend. This tends to be somebody that somebody can pressure. This tends to be somebody that you can build a relationship with so that it's awkward to say no. And if we're always teaching young girls and we are teaching girls, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਹਿ ਸਕਦੇ ਜਾਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਹਮੇਸ਼ਾ ਸਿਆਣਿਆਂ ਦੀਆਂ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਸਹੀ ਹੁੰਦੀਆਂ ਆ. What are we teaching these kids, right? What are the perceptions or the understanding that they're going to have when it comes to sexual abuse? These are the kids that are more likely to be abused or to be assaulted. And so there's a lot of myths about child sexual abuse. One is that, nice people don't sexually offend against children. You might know somebody, ਜਿਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਮਝਦੇ ਆ ਵੀ ਇਹ person ਬਹੁਤ ਚੰਗਾ ਆ, right? Nice people or people that you think are nice sexually assault people all the time. I see it at work. Most offenders aren't strangers. It tends to be somebody that you know in some way, shape, or form. Another myth is ਸਾਰੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਬੱਚਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਇਹ ਚੀਜ਼ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਆ ਉਹ ਵੀ ਵੱਡੇ ਹੋ ਕੇ ਇਹ ਚੀਜ਼ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ ਦੂਜਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ. This will not happen, especially if you get that person's support. Sometimes people who are abused will reenact that abuse to other people in order to process and understand mere naal ki hoya, what happened to me. And so what we need to, and sometimes they won't do that at all. We need to get kids support if they have been abused. Telling them things like apna chagga apne aap na chukko ya lokan nu nahi assi kehna, and not holding the offender accountable, jehde person ne eh galat cheez ਕੀਤੀ ਆ, is one of the worst things that you could possibly do, and the least supportive thing that you can possibly do for this person. You need to support people. You need to know that they have, that if their boundaries have been violated, that you believe them. Tell them that you are grateful that they shared this with you, and that you are grateful that they trusted you with this. Tell them vi main teri gal de utte yakin karda ਆਂ, ਸ਼ੁਕਰਾਨਾ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਕਰੋ ਵੀ ਤੂੰ ਮੇਰੇ ਨਾਲ ਇਹ ਗੱਲ ਕੀਤੀ ਤਾਂ ਮੇਰੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਤੂੰ ਮੈਨੂੰ trust ਕੀਤਾ ਇਹ ਗੱਲ ਮੇਰੇ ਨਾਲ ਕਰਨ ਲਈ, right? So these are the key takeaways that you need to tell them. So what does somebody need to hear from you? That you believe them, that ਜਿਹੜੀ ਚੀਜ਼ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਹੋਈ ਉਹ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ fault ਨਹੀਂ ਗੀ. It doesn't matter ਵੀ ਤੁਸੀਂ maybe ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕੋਈ family member ਦੇ ਘਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸੀਗੇ and ਤੁਸੀਂ sleep over ਤੇ ਸੀਗੇ and ਕਿਸੇ ਨੇ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਗਲਤ ਹੱਥ ਲਾਇਆ and ਤੁਸੀਂ ਉੱਥੇ ਫਿਰ ਕਿਉਂ ਸੁੱਤੇ, ਜਾਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ same bed ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਕਿਉਂ ਸੁੱਤੇ. People don't know that they're going to be raped or that they are going to be assaulted. People will do what it takes to keep themselves safe. It is never okay to shift the blame from the perpetrator, so ਜਿਹੜੇ person ਨੂੰ ਕੀਤਾ ਆ, onto the victim. When we say things like ਤੂੰ ਕੱਪੜਾ ਇਦਾਂ ਦਾ ਕਿਉਂ ਪਾਇਆ ਸੀਗਾ, ਜਾਂ ਤੂੰ ਇਹ action ਕਿਉਂ ਕੀਤਾ, what we're essentially doing is we're shifting the blame from ਜਿਹੜੇ person ਨੇ ਗਲਤ ਚੀਜ਼ ਕੀਤੀ to the person that didn't do anything wrong at all. ਜਿਹੜਾ person is situation ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ victim ਆ. You have to tell the person ਵੀ ਮੈਂ ਤੇਰੇ ਨਾਲ ਨਹੀਂ ਗੁੱਸੇ ਹੈਗਾ, and if they want to talk to that person and resolve it or have that open conversation, you need to be able to let them have it. If they don't want to talk to that person, you have to respect that. But the biggest thing is you have to stand up for them. You have to let them know that you're not angry with them, that you love them no matter what, that you can handle what is happening to them, and that you can protect them. And the best way to protect them is to know that you are there to support them. Know that they don't have to worry about me. ਜੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਆਪ ਰੋਣ ਪਿੱਟਣ ਲੱਗ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਆ, ਫਿਰ ਬੱਚੇ ਨੇ ਕਹਿਣਾ ਵੀ ਮੈਂ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਕਿਉਂ ਦੱਸਿਆ, right? ਵੀ ਹੁਣ ਮੇਰਾ ਮਾਂ ਪਿਓ ਗੁੱਸੇ ਹੋ ਗਿਆ ਜਾਂ ਉਹ sad ਹੋ ਗਿਆ ਜਾਂ ਜੋ ਵੀ ਚੀਜ਼ ਆ, right? So you have to recognize ਵੀ ਇਸ situation ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ you can be a secondary victim. A secondary victim is somebody who's related to the person who's a victim. And they might also feel, as a parent, ਜੇ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਬੱਚੇ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਕੁਝ ਗਲਤ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਆ, ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਵੀ ਦਿਲ ਦੁਖੂਗਾ. But to that kid, you have to show them that, whatever happened to you, it's okay. I'm here for you. I'm here to support you. And whatever it is, make sure that you get them support. Make sure that you build a protective circle for them at home, at school, at daycare, their extracurricular activities, and get them support, get them a psychologist, get them therapy. ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ free resources ਹੈਗੇ ਨੇ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਿਸੇ ਦੀ support ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਆ emotional stress ਨੂੰ manage ਕਰਨ ਲਈ. So Harleen, I'm going to pass it back over to you.
Yeah, thank you for, again, sharing your personal experiences. And I know it's difficult to open up about these things and be honest about them, especially because it is so stigmatized. So it's really inspiring that you're able to do it. For anybody who's feeling pressured or to stay quiet about this. And I know we were talking earlier as well that if you don't teach your children about sex, how will they ever know when they're being sexually abused, right? So it is really important to destigmatize. So, on the topic of destigmatizing, what are some broader changes we need to make?
Yeah, for sure. I think there's a lot of changes that we need to make. And there is, I'm seeing chats in the community that people are saying, how can broader conversations happen to discharge the community pressure? Right? How can we break away from the what will people say mentality, right? The older generation seems to hold on so strongly to this, right? And, which leads to a lot of unacceptable, harmful situations. And so give me 1 second. I'm just going to take a sip of my drink. Speaking with so much passion today, I'm losing my voice. We need to talk about the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is sex. We do not talk to children about sex, like I mentioned. We say that, if somebody has been in a relationship or somebody's divorced, now they're damaged goods. Or blah, 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 this type of thing, right? We've seen people that have been raped be forced to marry their rapists, right? Historically, we see this happening in India to this day, right? We need to destigmatize sex. Jiri sharmya that is associated with sex, we have to take that away. Because I've seen, the sharm keeping people in situations in which, they're being abused. I've seen that shame, making parents say to their kids, if they're in a domestic violence situation and maybe it's because they had a boyfriend or girlfriend that they weren't supposed to have, saying ਤੇਰੇ ਨਾਲ ਚੰਗਾ ਹੋਇਆ ਜਾਂ ਵਧੀਆ ਹੋਇਆ ਜਾਂ ਜੇ ਤੂੰ ਇਦਾਂ ਦੇ ਕੰਮ ਕਰਨੇ ਆ ਜਾਂ ਤੇਰੀਆਂ ਇਦਾਂ ਦੀਆਂ ਕਰਤੂਤਾਂ ਆ ਤਾਂ ਇਦਾਂ ਹੀ ਹੋਣਾ ਆ, right? We have to move away from that, right? If there has been sexual, somebody's been sexually assaulted, you need to stand up for them. And standing up for them looks like supporting them in whichever way they need. Supporting them looks like advocating for them, for speaking up for this person and helping them and supporting them, right? So much of the stigma that we have, and all of these things, right? Whether it's honor-based violence or domestic violence or sexual assault, the root cause is that we think women's value lies in their genitalia. We think women's value lies in sex. And that is not the reality. That is not the case. Women have value outside of that. And so we need to recognize that women's value comes from many other places: intelligence, their kindness, their character, who they are as a person. These are all things that we need to recognize, their relationship with themselves, their relationship with God. All of these things are the actual things that determine a person's worth and determine a person's value. It is not this idea about, sex and sexual violence. And, when it comes to, to violence, even to the point that, like, when we see historically, women used to burn themselves, right? Jira sati hunda saga. Women, when their husband was being cremated, used to jump into the fire alongside their husband's corpses. And in Sikhism, this was stopped. Because for a lot of people and for a long time in India, for generations, for centuries, and this happens to this day, women, it's considered that their life is over after their husband dies or after they break up with their husband or whatever it is, right? And so better than to live, this is the reality, right? This is the messaging behind this. Better than to live is to kill yourself along with your husband. But 500 years ago, our Gurujis recognized and put a stop to this form of violence because they recognize that women have value that is outside of their relationship with their husband, that is outside of their value of whether or not they have had sex with a person. And if that person dies or they break up with that person, that person no longer has value and that person no longer has worth. And so our Gurujis recognized this 500 years ago. Why are we still behind on this now? To this day, why are we still seeing this stigma? And so I realized that, we're coming up on time, so I'm going to sort of wrap this up quickly. We need to change our culture. We need to change the way that we are talking about these things. We are perpetuating and we are upholding when we say, तू देखा इस पर्सन नाल की होया सगा, तू देखा भी इन्हां दा ब्रेकअप हो गया, या तू देखा भी ਕਿਸੇ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਵਿਆਹ ਕਰਾਇਆ ਸੀਗਾ ਤੇ ਹੁਣ ਉਹ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਛੱਡ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਜਾਂ ਛੱਡ ਛੜਾਈਆ ਹੋ ਗਿਆ, or whatever other negative messaging or words are used, right? We need to recognize that the shameful thing is somebody hurting somebody. How many times have you heard somebody say, ਤੂੰ ਸੁਣਿਆ ਵੀ ਇਹ person ਆਪਣੀ ਵਾਈਫ ਨੂੰ ਕੁੱਟਦਾ ਆ ਜਾਂ ਮਾਰਦਾ ਆ, ਕਿੰਨੀ ਸ਼ਰਮ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਆ, ਇਹ person ਨੂੰ ਇਹ ਚੀਜ਼ ਆਪਣੀ ਵਾਈਫ ਦੇ ਅਗੇਂਸਟ ਜਾਂ ਆਪਣੀ ਫੈਮਿਲੀ ਦੇ ਅਗੇਂਸਟ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰਨੀ ਚਾਹੀਦੀ. We say ਵੀ ਇਹ ਇਸ person ਦਾ ਹੱਕ ਆ to do this to their kids or to do this to their wife. This is their right. And we need to move away from that. We need to move to a culture in which we call out the abusers and we call out the victimizers and not the victims. And we also need to change this mentality of loki ki kahange. And the other thing to remember is oftentimes it is not just men that uphold this. It is women too. These jokes and stuff about auntia and stuff like that, it's because aunties give into this thing called the patriarchal bargain. The patriarchal bargain is because it is so hard to fight back, because it is so awkward to have conversations like this and to even say the word sex and to be sitting up here and saying the things that I am today, because it's so awkward or can be viewed as shameful. And that can be difficult to do. Sometimes women, it's just easier to become a participant and say, "Hai kinni sharm di gall hai," rather than to actually call out the same stuff that is oppressing us. And so many of us give into our own compression. We condone, we encourage, and we commit that violence ourselves against the women in our own communities. And I think that is absolutely shameful. And we need to switch away from this thing, and we need to start holding victimizers and abusers accountable for the wrongs that they have done against those individuals. We need to shift it from, "Oh, tu sunya vi is kudi da divorce hoya siga ya eda shad shadaya ho gaya," over to, "Tu sunya siga vi eh person enu potda ya eda sharm di gall hai," right? That is where the sharm comes from. It does not come from somebody's, private parts or something like that. So, it's really about abuse, right? And that is what we need to talk about when it comes to shame. So Harleen, I'm going to pass this back over to you. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep up these slides on how we can talk to young people. While I'm actually going ahead and answering some of the questions, please feel free to actually screenshot these slides, just because we're getting quite close to 7:00 and I do want to leave some time for questions as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jasminder. This was super engaging and helpful. And I know for a fact that everyone here has learned a lot from your talk. So let's take some questions from the audience. Once again, please type your questions in the Q&A box, or you can raise your hand and we will unmute you. Okay, so the first question here. Do you have statistical data about violence in the South Asian community for Canada versus India versus England?
This is something that I'm happy to follow up with. So if there's any questions about statistics, I'm happy to follow up with the resources on the actual statistics around this stuff, because I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I definitely do have the numbers. So I can send that over to Harleen. She can follow up with that in the follow-up email tomorrow.
Yeah, I'll send out the email after tomorrow, so that with all the resources and everything that Jasminder has mentioned today. What are some of the main differences you see in how domestic violence is acknowledged in Canada versus India? Is there more awareness in India or Canada these days that is wrong? Were the trends declining or rising prior to COVID? A few questions.
So this is really great. I'm gonna, answer this quickly, actually. So when it comes to this, the main difference that I see is, I think in all countries, is that younger kids are fighting back. We are having these awkward conversations that, people feel awkward or shameful, having, right? So because we see a lot of persons standing up and having these conversations and organizing events like this, that's a huge difference that I see. I also see that, oftentimes in Canada, because things like divorce or separation are a little bit more normalized, people, when they've been in abusive relationships, I've noticed sometimes do feel more comfortable leaving. But of course, because, we still live in this society with other South Asian people in our community, sometimes it's still just as much stigma as we experience in our communities back in India. And so since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, when it comes to gender-based violence, that's actually been reported to the police, there's been a 40% increase worldwide. That's police reported, right? So ਜਿਹੜੇ ਲੋਕੀ ਇੰਨੇ comfortable feel ਕਰਦੇ ਆ ਕਿ ਉਹ police ਨੂੰ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਗੱਲ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਆ. There's people that don't feel comfortable reporting to the police. There's people that can't speak the language. There's, police in India are like, you have to bribe them, or they'll shame you or stigmatize you for, experiencing that violence, or tell you just put up with it or just deal with it, right? So this is the 40% is the number of people who felt comfortable going to the police. I think that number has risen over 100%. We have, I would say, like, it has, multiplied at least tenfold. And we've seen that in the statistics around domestic violence and deaths as well.
Yeah, for sure. It all ties back to destigmatizing, right?
For sure.
Yeah, another question we have, how can we break away from that what will people say mentality? The older generation especially seems to hold on to that so strongly, which leads to so many staying in unacceptable, harmful situations that you've discussed.
For sure. So the big thing to remember is when we say like how do we break away from the what will people say mentality, right? The reality is that we just have to stop caring what people say, right? Like we can't change what people are going to say or that people are going to think certain things, right? Like for me, when I broke off my roka, I did that fully knowing that people are going to say bad things about me, or people are going to say we, oh my god, inne ki karta, or blah blah blah, right? I knew that, but I did it anyways. And you know what? People talked anyways. And guess what? I am a million times happier today. And I am so grateful that I do not have to spend the rest of my life with somebody that does not make me happy. And I am grateful to my parents who actually gave me the space and the ability to do that. Yes, there was some pushback, but overall, they respected my decision to actually get a roka to the person that I was dating. And then they also respected my decision to break that off. And I am so grateful to my parents that they gave me the ability and they respected my decision in order to do that. They knew that people were going to talk as well. And they still did that for me because they knew that I could not spend the rest of my life with somebody like that. Um, and I love them so much for it. So the reality is you just have to not care. And that's hard. That's very hard to do. It's way easier said than done.
Yeah, for sure. I 100% agree. And it's not what will people say, it's what makes me happy, right?
Exactly. What makes me happy and what keeps me safe,
Yeah,
right? Those are the
keeping
two
safe for
important
sure.
things. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Another question we have, how does domestic violence impact mental health? Are there any studies in our community that have been done?
Yeah, so I can actually follow up with some studies as well. So Harleen or any other of one of the other hosts, if you don't mind actually writing down the questions that I need to follow up with, that would be very helpful. Um, so domestic violence definitely impacts mental health, and we know that this impacts mental health intergenerationally, right? So it's not just that one generation that has experienced that violence, it's the next generations ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਅਗਲੀਆਂ ਪੀੜ੍ਹੀਆਂ ਆ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਵੀ ਅਸਰ ਪੈਂਦਾ ਆ, right? ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸਾਡੀ ਦਿਮਾਗੀ ਹਾਲਤ ਆ ਉਹਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਵੀ ਅਸਰ ਪੈਂਦਾ ਆ, and we see high rates of substance abuse in our communities. We see that, you know, we see this violence. We see young people that are raised in homes in which there's violence happening, and then later on they turn to things like drugs in order to cope with what they have seen, right? And with what they've experienced. And so we know that domestic violence impacts mental health. And we know that we need to ensure that we are in safe situations. And we know that if we have experienced, or even if we've witnessed domestic violence happening, we need support. And I'm more than happy to follow up with some supports on where you can potentially get free therapy and free supports and things like that in order to, you know, really get that knowledge.
Yeah, for sure. And we'll copy the questions that you need to follow up with. How can the broader, this is the last question we have. How can the broader conversations happen to discharge the community pressure that exists?
I think the biggest thing is that we need to destigmatize sex. We need to move away from purity culture, where we value people based on whether or not they have had sex, whether that's during marriage, whether that's before marriage, whether that's after marriage. We need, I think that's the biggest thing that we actually need to destigmatize and take the shame and that shame away from it. And we also need to critically analyze, what is our role in this? How do we contribute to it? Every time I talk badly about somebody behind their back, I'm contributing to that culture in which this type of stuff is happening, in which it's occurring, in which that type of you know, I'm upholding it. And the thing is, we need to move away from it, right? We need to end this toxic cycle, this intergenerational trauma that we have, and we can only do that. We can only do that if we have broader conversations, destigmatizing sex, And also we, critically analyze what's the role that we play and what's the role that the things that I say and the impact that the things that I say have.
Yes, and thank you everyone for your question. But that's all the time we have today. Thank you so much, Jasminder, for taking the time to join us and talk about all these. They're difficult topics to talk about, but they need to be talked about. And you've shown us that example. And I can for sure speak for everyone here and say that this was a very engaging discussion. Some quick announcements. This year's SHM Ottawa has partnered with the Manmeet Singh Bhullar Foundation to help raise funds to sponsor Afghan religious minorities and to help settle them in Canada. For more information or to donate, please visit our website, shmottawa.com, or the foundation's website, themsbf.ca. And finally, I must announce the closure of Sikh Heritage Month Ottawa 2021. It was an amazing month with 18 events, 2 projects, and a fundraiser for Afghan minorities. The SHM Ottawa stage showcased over 30 speakers, marking the largest SHM Ottawa to date. We want to also take a moment to thank every single audience member who took the time to attend our virtual events. You truly kept the spirit of SHM alive and helped spread it across the world. If you would like to relive any of these events, please check out our YouTube channel, SHM Ottawa. We hope to see everyone at future SHM Ottawas. Thank you so much, everyone, again. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.